everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Running Large-Scale Automated Visual Testing, a Dow Jones Case Study, with Dow Jones Engineering Director, Mr. Sumeet Mandloi. It's a real privilege to have Mr. Sumeet Mandloi join us today. Sumeet's career spans 18 years in quality assurance, test automation, product and release management, with some of the big industry leaders such as UBS, Citibank, TD Ameritrade, and Dow Jones, where he was instrumental in building effective and efficient quality engineering organizations. His recent BDD, Behavior-Driven Development Framework, built using open source technologies such as Cucumber, Spec, Cucumber Unit, Ruby, and Java, helped Dow Jones be the finalist twice in a row at the European Testing Awards 2016 and 2017. And of course, if you're following the test automation conferences worldwide, he is a very sought after and popular speaker in test automation conferences. Joining him today will be Mr. Eran Barlev, Senior Customer Success Engineer at Applitools. So without any further ado, I think it's best to let them speak now. So Eran, take it away.
Thank you very much, Adi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
I'll take that as a yes. Wonderful. Hey everyone, this is Eran here. I'm happy to be here today and joined by Sumeet from Dow Jones. We'll cover a few topics today, with the majority of our time spent hearing from Dow Jones on a real-world case study for automated visual testing, but I will spend a few explaining why we need it and what it is actually, before handing it to Sumeet to take us through tips for scaling and Dow Jones case study. So why do we actually need visual testing? Your brand today, your brand experience today is digital across all layers, I will say. Everything is digital today. Basically, screens are replacing our retail stores, our banking services, even restaurants, online ordering. We're interacting with our phones, our tablets, our laptops constantly. The result is an endless number of device types, device sizes, screen resolutions, OS, browsers, you name it. The list is endless. But more than that, there is an endless number of combinations you're accountable for. And without an automated tool that can help you test all these in parallel and at scale, it's impossible to keep up. There is no way you manually can test all these permutations of scenarios. And yet there is an expectations from our organizations and from our customers that our applications and website just work no matter what. To add on top of that, we can throw in even versions of each and every of those elements, whether it says browsers, but this applies to OS and devices. So this becomes a monster matrix of combinations that we need to cover all of them. To make things even more complicated in our world, we are expected to release faster and more frequently. Again, both from our customers who want new features out there tomorrow, and from our company who wants to always stay ahead of the curve. There's a big push to automate everything from top to bottom, and we need to make sure that all our buttons, our colors, our forms, everything that has our brand on it remains visually perfect every time someone checks in code to our repo. The main identity that suffers from this issue is obviously our brand if there is an issue with their release. So what we need to make sure is we use what's called today CI/CD, which is an emerging practice that is critical if we want to keep up with the way that the market is going. And if something breaks, basically, this impacts our brand. And these two trends that they want, faster releases and more reliable releases, that they collide in a very nasty way, and they break the UI very easily, and obviously negatively impacting the customers, and nobody is spared. Just to show you a few examples from brands I'm sure you all know. This is Microsoft, a UI bug in their Azure dashboard. Another example is UPS app on the tablet. The list goes on. We have Twitter here, Amazon. I'm sure you all noticed some glitches yesterday. Nothing to do with UI, but still frustrating. It's not a great experience. And even Dow Jones is not spared, and this is just teasing Sumeet here. We'll get back to that later. So what basically is it? Visual testing. Our mission here is to ensure that visually perfect user experiences on every browser, every device through automated visual AI testing and monitoring are a part of your CI/CD pipeline. And this is kind of like a new layer of testing that we need to introduce to our teams. Visual testing is basically the process of validating all the visual aspects of an application's UI on all platforms. This goes beyond functional testing, which has its limits. So if you're using tools like Selenium, for example, you know that you can query those elements and you'll get the result. Yes, the button is there, the button is yellow, the button has text on it, but won't tell you if something is blocking visually that specific element and does it appear as it's supposed to be. So just looking at the code is not enough, and this is why humans are required to actually look at those pages. What we're introducing here is the AI-powered visual testing. Today, this is a reliable solution. It's mature already, and most important, it is scalable. Before Applitools, the only way we could do visual testing was to wait basically for a release and then have manual testers validate the visual elements on the screen. Or worst case scenario, wait for the customers to complain when they encounter a bug, something is blocking their login button, or trying to check out your cart on your shopping site. That might not be a huge deal if you're releasing every few months or once a year even, but again, as we said earlier, if we're now moving towards with the trend of CI/CD, the companies are adopting more and more agile best practices, and this just won't cut it. It's not enough, and we need to have an extra tool in our toolbox. To release frequently with confidence, we need an automated way to check the visual elements of our code every time we make a change, and not just every major release. And that's where we come in, Applitools. Our visual AI technology accurately mimics the behavior of the human eye and brain to provide full visual test validation in seconds. The way it works, it's relatively straightforward. You drive your application and you take screenshots with whatever tool that you're using. Eyes will compare those screenshots with your baseline, will report the differences back to you, and then you can go ahead and decide whether those differences are a bug or they are basically an updated baseline, because it was a required change to that specific page. If the button moved or the color changed or there's a new structure to the page, that needs to be validated. And then you basically repeat the process and start building your visual test suites. You can take these tests and run them across different browsers, different devices, and maintain them all automatically using the same baseline functionality. And this basically helps you move to the next level. So if we look at the pipeline of the testing tools that are out there today, the frequent bottleneck for those testing teams is getting the last step of the cycle, the UI validation, to make that automated. So we have all these great tools that helps us with the unit testing. We have great tools that help us with functional testing. But when it comes to visual testing, this is where Applitool comes in. It is the first commercial grade solution to automate the visual testing process and complete the test automation toolchain. Now you can free up resources to focus less on tedious review of screenshots and more on relevant bugs that benefit from a human eye examining that specific page. it is a complement and extension of functional testing. It does not replace it completely. And you're already doing that with other tools like Selenium and Appium. So this is an add-on to take your testing results to the next level. Functional testing, it is critical, but it has its limitations. Now, how can we actually scale this? So first, we need to have a robust image comparison engine. As I mentioned earlier, in functional testing, if we want to compare a certain element on the page across how it behaves across multiple browsers, across multiple OSs, we will get different results every single time. And when we're comparing, when we're using tools such as open source tools that do image comparison, you cannot simply do a bitmap comparison because there are limitations to it. And I'm going to show you a few examples here. So here is one example where we have a tab of various elements, and one of them is playlist. And if we zoom in the way that a bitmap or a pixel by pixel comparison tool would look at it, we can actually see that it's very pixelized. Now I'm going to skip next, and we'll see how this would look on a different browser, for example. And I'm going to go back and forth so we can see the differences. So if you were to write that software and you're comparing those pixel by pixel, you will definitely fail this test. However, if a human would look at it, they will look at the part at the bottom right here, and they would say, no, that's fine. This is how it's supposed to be. It says playlist, and it looks just fine. You can play with thresholds until the sun comes up, but it's not always enough because it is across the page itself or the image itself, and it's not accurate to the specific element that you want to test. And doing that is basically taking it back to more manual testing, and it's not scalable. Another example is this text at the bottom. We're talking here about font anti-aliasing, where different browsers, different OSs process fonts differently. And we can see that, again, the human eye, it looks just fine. But if we're processing it in a, I would say, pixel by pixel way, this is simply not good enough. Another example is image processing. Here we have a few pixels that are highlighted here. If we zoom in, we can see that between different browsers, OSs, even the graphic cards, they are completely different. So obviously the test will fail. Now, of course, you can tweak everything and get different results manually, but what we're trying to focus here is on the ability to scale it and to automate it. So we don't have to manually go and write a formula to examine and compare each and every pixel based on that specific test that we're running. What if tomorrow we're going to change the image? What if we're rebranding and changing our logo across the website, across our social media, and we still want to run those tests and get the same result every single time? So this is just one example of those differences that Applitools can catch for you. Next is, as I mentioned, you can use the same baseline across devices and browser, even though the results would be different. So instead of maintaining multiple baselines for each device and each browser, and then you have a huge database of tests that you need to run over and over again, you can actually consolidate them into one baseline and use that as your lead baseline for all tests across all platforms and all devices. So if you use a cloud-based, I would say, device farm to test across all these browsers, using eyes, you can simplify that and test it against one baseline instead of each and every version of a browser that you want to test on that platform. And then this is basically how this would look like if you have different browsers on different OSs on different devices. You'll have different versions of your baseline. One last tip here. we can do both everything that I've just mentioned from the code and more. It gives you much more flexibility. We support many languages, many platforms that you can integrate Applitools eyes with. And our dashboard also gives you the ability to control and maintain your baseline in a codeless manner, where you can literally define regions to look at and define how you want to look at them, whether it's in a strict mode, which is like the human eye, or in a layout mode, which allows you to test whether the page looks correctly from the structure perspective and not from the content. Today, it's one of our challenges that the content is constantly changing. So grabbing screenshots for every time the page changes, this becomes impossible to just do bitmap comparison if you want to check the structure of that specific page. And with that, I want to pass the baton to my colleague here, who is going to talk about how Dow Jones is using Applitools. Sumeet, the stage is yours.
All right. Can you guys see my screen and hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you okay and see your screen.
Awesome. All right. So first of all, thank you, Eran, for running through the deck and also for organizing this, Addy. So, and welcome all. I will walk through some of my experiences on, Eran did speak about why visual testing is important, but I'll speak from a business or product perspective. What are the things we are seeing change? What are the new trends we are seeing? Why visual is becoming so more important? Because you didn't get the necessity for these tools, say 5 years down the line, right? Now, visual is becoming more and more important. So I'll share some of my thoughts around that. Before I do get started, one of the things that I do get asked a lot is, I work at Dow Jones, which people think is a financial company, and why would visual testing matter so much for an index? So just so you know, Dow Jones does not mean by any chance the index that we all keep talking about and we make and lose money on. This is a division which is news and media. So we publish one of the most trusted newspapers in the world from last 125 years, and that is Wall Street Journal. And I hope some of the people in the audience reads the newspaper, at least if not in form of a paper, digitally. So the fact that we produce such a big brand, quality becomes very, very critical in making sure that the product that you lay out is up to the mark. What we are making sure is that the impact of the product that we have is becoming very critical now, more so than in the other time. Every company is going through a digital transformation, and with digital transformation comes a challenge of saying, how do we work together as a team? And that's why this famous quote from Henry Ford comes to my mind, where QA, I'm very sure you guys in your experience have seen, comes as an afterthought and used to come as an afterthought in the past life. Things are changing now, right? We are trying to make a point of saying that if QA is not part of, if quality is not a part of your development cycle or your design cycle or your requirements or whatever phases you can call it, you're never going to be successful. So our motto in Dow Jones is that if we all want to be successful and the product needs to be successful, we all need to work together, and that's how success comes. I was talking to you about, in general, why quality is becoming forefront. So just to give you a few examples, when I came to this organization, we were on our journey to deploy some very major redesign for our websites, including Wall Street Journal, Barron's.com. Our apps are going through change, and all that is happening because digital is the thing. Everybody wants to go digital, so we cannot just afford to be behind, and the businesses are all trying to catch up. So when I came to Dow Jones, we wanted to make sure that some of the critical things in quality are at forefront. And of the 5 things that you see on this slide deck, the 2 things that have become very critical and successful to us is we are no longer in a business of tracking defects, right? Gone are the days when you can deploy a perfectly functional website, but it's not looking good, right? And that's why we have a saying which says, good enough never is. Gone are the days where you can deploy a perfectly functional site, because people make first impressions when they come to your site, and that's what the the brand that they carry with him. Like, so many of us go to Amazon, and why don't we go to other sites to buy the products? It has a lot to do with usability, it's got a lot to do with user experience, it's got a lot to do with how the UI looks. There's a science behind why color schemes are chosen, why buttons are at a certain place, why text is displayed in a certain font. um, the color of the font matters. Um, so we have transformed ourselves to say, let's not concentrate on just functionally if the app works, but are we giving a good customer experience? um, and number one thing to make sure that the customer experience is good is if it visually looks good. If it doesn't visually look good, you probably will try to make an impression. They always say, right, don't judge the book by the cover, but all of us do, right? We make our first impression by looking at something. Um, so we actually at Dow Jones did some studies and found that, I don't know if it will be very surprising for some of the people on the webinar today to know that we all make first impressions about every site we go. And first I thought maybe it will be in seconds, but for just so you guys know, it takes 17 milliseconds for somebody to come to your site and look at it and say, am I going to continue on this site or am I leaving it? And that's a very, very short time that you have. So we further dig through this and said, what is critical, because every time we go we feel like usability is important, how many steps it takes to do the action, how easy is it is, and everybody concentrates on that. But the studies shown that your UI matters more so than anything else. So that is why we started digging through and saying, how do we make that process of visually testing easier and better at Dow Jones? So I think this slide, some of what you see on this side is what Eran spoke with about it earlier, where now your web platforms, your mobile apps are your face of the business, right? Um, Customers are always demanding the best and first impression. So it's um, it's necessary for for us to give a good impression to the customers, and we have to respond to the business needs very quickly, right? So the whole test cycle is getting crunched small, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So um, on this, um, obviously you see that your app quality is also critical, because you can push, I shouldn't say we can't push changes daily, but it's harder to push changes every day. You need to then force people to make updates, which some of us will like and some of us will not. Um, And in this whole digitalization or digital transformation, what is becoming very challenging is the feedback that the customers used to give to you. Gone are the days that, for you to get a feedback on your app or your website, somebody had to pick up a phone and call your customer service and say, hey, your site looks bad, or I can't do this on your site, or I can process my payment, or I can't buy a thing. Um, Unfortunately, social media has changed all that tremendously. So your one wrong move and you could be on Twitter, right? And one wrong move and the news of your redesign not going well or not redesigned correctly could become like a frenzy on Twitter or on Facebook. I deal with it a lot because we keep making changes for better and better, and we suddenly start seeing, some prominent figure on Twitter makes any comment, however small or big it is, and your leadership looks to you and say, hey, how is that happening? Why is that happening? And that is in that whole circle. Quality engineering is now becoming more and more critical piece to all of this journey than ever before. So for some of the people who are on this webinar and have gone to conferences where you hear the words testing is dead, it's not, right? Testing is transforming, and testing is becoming more and more critical. If you look at some of the recent data that has been produced or statistics, um, in the coming year 2019, 40% of companies' overall IT budget will be quality engineering. So it's getting a lot of good push, and people understand now more so than ever that testing cannot be, just test on IE and deploy the change, or test on Chrome and test on Firefox. Now you look at what you're seeing on my screen. Your matrix has become way too big to cover manually, right? Um, Again, if you look at this, you have different combinations of web browsers, devices, um, name it, right? Now, to test this functionally, we have had automated frameworks for a longest time. So I remember my days on Windrunner, and then I'm sure people know Quick Test Pro, and so on and so forth. But now what's happening is that the companies are not willing to spend that much money on licensed softwares. So there's a big push to move to an open source tool. So, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because um, testing has been forced to transform um, on saying, hey, how do we respond to doing things faster? And you cannot just tell me that something functions correctly, um, because maybe that doesn't mean so much to the users as getting a good feel, right? If somebody goes to wallstreetjournal.com, um, can they read the story is important. The way the layouts are given is important. You have pictures, they need to render correctly. You need videos. So there's a lot of different media types that you need to address to. So what is not here is that apart from the fact that testing is becoming, the matrix is becoming way too big, the challenges around testing also are becoming more complex. You've all heard this. This is one of, I like this picture a lot. Sometimes they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this is what's happening. Your business is having very short release cycles, and that is because to stay competitive, we need to be able to adapt to changing very frequently, and that is the reality of digital transformation. So you see, I think, I still remember we used to do one release in 6 months at some point in my career, and then it was acceptable, right? You went through the rigor of 2 months of writing a requirement and testing for a month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever that was. I don't think we can all afford to go to a meeting and say it will take me 2 months to test something, because if that's the case, we've not broken the thing down enough to be able to deploy faster. So your release cycles are getting shorter. The reality is because business is looking to make constant change instead of waiting for 6 months to do a big change. If you guys have been listening to the latest from Amazon and a couple of other big giants, they are deploying every single day. And some of the people who obviously who are here from testing background are going to say that doesn't give me enough time to test, but that is becoming reality now. And the reason they are doing that is because they would like to engage customers, and the only way to engage somebody is change, right? It's almost like we all go to a restaurant, and if it has a constant menu, every day you get the same thing, we'll go there 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months, and then you stop going there, right? That is, again, digital transformation is changing all that, because people are very anxious to look for change in every product, including news. So they are getting shorter, right? Now, this is the infamously famous words that you keep hearing in QA corridors all across. QA is the bottleneck. Um, I wish this webinar was kind of two-way communication, and I could, by raise of hands, see how many people hear this, but I'm sure they do, right? 63%, this is not me, this is stats, which say that there are people who believe QA is a bottleneck in DevOps, because maybe there are not efficient automated testing tools which have been developed by the company. So automation is becoming a key piece to solve this bottleneck. Um, Obviously, you see 70% of testing is still done manually, and there are right reasons for that, right? So I don't think all of what you see here is bad, or we would like to get this number down to like 10%, right? There are a lot of value in a human being sitting down and checking something, but that is to focus on more domain related complex logic, things that require somebody to really know the inside, than a UI tool, right? I wouldn't want to put my visual testing to a manual person, because that is really waste of human mind. Human mind can do a lot more than just sitting down at a screen and staring at it and say, does this button look right on my iPhone, right? So focus on things that matter more, and try to change the value of what human beings can do to more complex things around the business, around the domain, around a good user experience, so to understand who your user base is and develop testing. So I think fundamentally what is going to happen and is happening now, that your test execution per se is automated, so you're testing in an automated fashion, but the art of designing your test scripts is still very manual, and it will always be. And your tests are only as good as the test you think about. So we at Dow Jones are spending our human capital on making sure that we've built the right test bed, right? uh, we think about all the complex business logic that we have, and lay that out in a test script, as opposed to actually testing manually, right? um, you will see that based on this data, around 72% of people agree that if you need to be in a continuous testing model, you need to shift your culture. And what that means is QA needs to have a seat at the table at the product development phase. QA needs to be able to build. And by the way, I've been using this word QA a lot, but I think I would want to just really quickly mention that I myself don't like to call it QA anymore. We at Dow Jones pride ourselves to be a quality engineering team, and that's why we don't call us QA anymore. And because sometimes, unfortunately, QA had a different impact on people, right? They just thought of QA as somebody who just sits at the table and looks at a screen and says 1:1 and A equal to A. We are not that anymore, right? We are quality engineers, and we are part of an engineering function. We are no longer part of a so-called QA organization that's completely isolated. That's a different job function. All of my teams are very well integrated into their development teams, into their product teams, actually, not so much even development teams. So they are sitting at the table shoulder to shoulder with their product teams to understand what's being built. So that's what culture changes, right? So I will try to get you guys back on track on what I'm supposed to be talking about, and that is visual testing, and how do we make sure that we automate that, and how do we make sure we are successful. So this was a long journey, because we looked at variety of different tools, we looked at frameworks. So you heard Sikuli a little earlier. We went through that route of building our own framework and and doing things synchronously. And then you all know, what happens when you try to do bitmap comparisons dot to dot, because bitmaps change a lot. You can't rely on them completely. So we went through all that motion unless we did a case study with Applitools. And what I liked really about this particular tool was that most of the time when we were building a framework to test visually, it was a separate framework. What was very nice about Applitools was it was very seamlessly integrated into our world. So we did not build new scripts. We just took our functional testing framework or automated functional testing framework and integrated with Applitools. And I'll talk a little bit more about how seamless that was and what are the value proposition that it brings. Uh, the other good thing was once I automated, I don't need to worry about testing for UI manually at all, right? We have had successful redesigns on our websites, and I'm giving you just this tip that your ROI, and we'll talk about ROI later, but our ROI is really good if you are looking for redesigns of your websites, things moving from a non-responsive to a responsive design. So Applitools was something that we really liked. Again, this slide is more what Addy and these guys can talk about, but I can say from my experience, it works, right? We've tried it with different softwares within my company, and it works. So I was talking about ROI, and what mattered to us at Dow Jones was, how do we do a single page validation um, by integrating with the tool. So we do not have to write thousands of lines of validation code to say, if you see this button, the size should be this, the color should be this, the font should be this. We don't have to do any of that. That's all taken away from doing testing manually to being automated. We also value the fact that it's an automatic maintenance. So once you run your changes, you get the differences that you have in different environments, and then with a click of a button, you can either approve the change or disapprove. So I'll give you a simple example. If you have your baseline, and then the next day you run your test, and you see that, and it happens, right? Your button is just off by a um, certain value, you can accept or reject that change. And you said, this is minor, this is expected, I don't think that's a bug. You can do that maintenance very quickly. Also, it's cognitive vision. So what it means is it ignores differences that are invisible to human eye. So um, you can avoid false positives. So one of the things I would want to mention, and maybe Ari and Eran would probably um, not like it as much as I would say, but the fact is it's a journey, right? There will be false positives initially when you do integrate the tool, and there is a time and energy that has to be spent, but it's a partnership. So you should not expect that you'll integrate with the tool, you'll go in and everything will work day one. There is obviously some commitment required from you, and there is a partnership that's through Applitools, where you know they work with you on making sure that you understand how false positives can be avoided, what are false positives, what are not false positives, and there has been significant changes in the product around that. So if we have time permitting, we can talk about it in the end. um, Again, one of the things that I already mentioned, this was it was a turnkey solution, so there's no setup cost. We go in and we acquire the license, and we can do a seamless integration with our test automation. So we have an automated suite. We integrated that with Applitools, and then we run that on a device farm or a multi-device through a company. So essentially, you are able to integrate very seamlessly. There's like one line of code that lets you just connect to ApplyEyes, and then once you're connected, that's it. You do a baseline and you move forward. One of the things I do want to mention, which didn't come before, was obviously Dow Jones produces news and has business across the globe. That means we need to support multiple different languages. Uh, in the past, the only way for us to be able to test on multi-language was very challenging. You could not do it on any other tool. So now we are able to. We've been able to test our changes in Japanese, in Chinese, in so many different languages. So that's a very big um, advantage. Again, this is more so what we've done for demo purposes, but you would see that in Applitools there are various different ways then you can test that. So, for example, if you look at the Dow Jones homepage, and if you go to dowjones.com, you will see that if your logo doesn't show up, you are able to. So, if you look at the picture on the left and the right, you'll see that if one of the logos doesn't show up, you get an alert and said this test failed because the logo didn't show up. Now, it would have not been very easy for you to do that in any other tool, but it's very easy. So you could, and again, there are multiple different modes for this. So you can run test with just layout mode. So, for example, right, news media, our content is constantly refreshing, or constantly changing. So if I was to run my test with content only mode, it will fail all the time because it will not find the same content. So we have a layout mode. You run your test in a layout. So all you care about is making sure you have a layout, and where your ads are supposed to show up, they show up. Where your content's supposed to show up, shows up. Where your buttons are supposed to be are showing up. You don't really care about the content inside the box. And when I say don't care, from a visual testing perspective, we don't care, but that content is something we really care about. But there are different ways. So you see that if you have a very strict mode of running the test, then it will fail because it's going to look for a matching content. If you don't want to do that, you shift to a layout mode, as I mentioned, and you should be able to get a positive result. So there are various different and maybe that's something we can explore on the tool, is there are a variety of different modes in which we can run your test on, and you can set your thresholds um, to be certain things. So you can definitely set thresholds to say it's okay for me to not show my content 100%, or I can make my layout mode also very so it's a very highly configurable system that you play with, and setting up thresholds, setting up your parameters, setting up your KPIs on what you would like it to test, and how how you want to see the results is very highly configurable for my perspective. And what I like the most is if there's a change that I need to accept on all scripts, it's just a click of a button. So it's not like going through every script to make a change. If you see that your button doesn't show up right on IE, and you want to accept the change not showing up on Chrome and Firefox, you can all do that in one shot. Again, this is very quick. I already spoke about integrations, but it can be very easily integrated with your functional testing. It supports a lot of different frameworks, so it doesn't have to be Selenium. It can be HP, Quality, QTP, or UFT, and name it, right? You can build a framework practically in anything. It works. It integrates with third-party device forms. So you have Perfecto, Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, you can name it. And the best part is it's Jenkins integrated. So we have test, we go into Jenkins, we click, the test run, and off we go. So we did that as a POC initially, and then we are running full scale now. This is most important. I think people would want to know is what's the ROI, right? What is the benefit of using this tool? So one, obviously the best benefit is it reduces your time that you spent on manual visual QA by 90%. So you don't need to put people behind to test anything visually manually now. The 10% is the effort of making sure that the results you get are reviewed and done and properly. What is also important, because I got asked this question one time, is do you really find a lot of bugs, right? Because that's more important. Like, do we really get a lot of visual bugs on apps? Because people make an assumption that bugs are more functional, but I have to tell you that you at least get 20% of the bugs that we find are more around visual, and that's a big number, right? So if you find 100 issues, almost 20 of them are visual, so it is important to test visually. um, Total effort, testing effort, has been reduced tremendously because we were using a large army of people to test something. We don't need to do that, and even that's contributing to a lot of reduction in the total testing effort. So we've gone from 30 to 40% to almost 2 hours, to 30 to 40 hours to 2 hours. Now, this is very crucial because this goes back to my point of the quote you saw from Henry Ford, that who can benefit from this? So if you were to primarily use this tool only from a testing or a quality engineering team perspective, the benefit is not going to be as much as if you want this to be across your company. So when the design teams and the UX teams start to dream up a vision and design a perfect site, they just don't want to design that perfect site that doesn't look perfect on different platforms, right? So it needs to be visually perfect. So it gives them a tool of testing something there. You can have marketing teams who want to have marketing campaigns, advertising teams want to think about different types of ads. They can all go there and see how their ads are rendering. It's a huge advantage for them. So my overall point on this is just not a tool that benefits a testing team or a testing organization. It benefits an overall organization as a whole, and it helps with the shift left culture that we all talk about. It helps with overall speeding up your development process too, right? At the end of the day, you don't want to just reduce your testing effort in your testing time, but can you reduce the total overall product deployment or product building time? And that is where the advantage of this tool comes from. So I think with that, I think this is all I had to say. I will hand it over to Addy now. Unless
Yes.
Addy, you want me to cover something else.
What?
Unless you want to cover
Again?
anything else, I think over to you.
No, so we do have a few questions. So I think we'll start with them and we'll see how it goes. So first of all, a question that I really liked regarding the QA as a bottleneck slide. And this is the question. You said that continuous testing requires a major shift in culture, a seat at the table, as you said. How can I, as a tester, contribute to facilitate this change?
Right. So that's actually an excellent question, and so here's where this is just my opinion and my thoughts around this. So uh, one thing is, obviously the real value is, as I said, we are not QA anymore, is quality engineering. So what would be really helpful is if you focus on telling people the art of, like, so what's more crucial for you to get a seat at the table is for you to be able to review the requirements and try to find gaps. Where I've seen most value is if you as a testing lead or a leader will look at something and say to business and said, have you thought about this scenario that happens? Or what if 4th of July falls on a weekday, and your calendar throws off, right? You're not supposed to be having a holiday showing up on your calendar. So I think what really matters is where you focus more on making sure you look at the product as a whole and provide comment. Second thing is, what I try to tell my team to do a lot is just don't focus on what's been given to you as a requirement and you test what you've been told to test. Always explore, always ask the questions, however good or bad it is. And third thing is, give a feedback from like a customer experience perspective. So you can look at something and say, I know the requirement says that this is how big the font should look like, but do you really think that somebody who's in like certain demographics will like it like that. So always provide feedback. I would always say, say something when you see something.
Can I go to the next question, Sumeet?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So another question. I'm sorry, you know, it's a cool startup when you have a few dogs in the background making a hassle. So apologies for that. Next question. As a manager, when you are hiring for your quality team, what do you look for in testers or test automation engineers?
Wow, that's a good question. So to me, I think there are two skills that I really think make you a successful tester. One of them is being proactive. So your proactiveness is very, very crucial, because you, unfortunately, in your trade, you can't just say it's not my problem, and I found a defect, I send it to a development team, and now I don't care when he fixes it, right? So constant follow up on making sure that they are working on fixing things that you find, proactively following up with people on things you need is very crucial. And secondly, I think in overall, I consider people who are very inquisitive. So you have to be very it's like a childlike thing. You compare this to a 4-year-old, and for everything my 4-year-old is for every answer I have, the question is why, right? You say, I go to office, why? Because I need to get money. Why? Because I want to buy something for you. Why? So I think that why and being that childlike curiosity is important. So these are two things I would say.
Wonderful. Okay, this question can go either to Sumeet or Eran. So Sumeet mentioned this in the values Dow Jones care about, by the way. So the question is, how does exactly Applitools help test an app in multiple languages?
Eran, you want to take that?
Eran, are you with us?
All right, so
you're on mute.
I can. So again, I think I'll take a stab at it, and he can provide more technical details. But it's something that's from an end user perspective, it doesn't really matter. So what you do is, just like you baseline your app on different browsers, you can baseline your app on a certain language, and then every time. So the first pass of getting a baseline and making sure that is correct is an effort that you need to spend with the teams to translate, to make sure that the translations and everything on the site looks right. But once you have that baseline, then it's a matter of just running against that baseline. So it's nothing.
Sorry, Sumeet. This is Eran here. I had a glitch here. Thanks for jumping in and saving the day. Just to circle back to that question about multi-language, it's just echoing what Sumeet said, but you have to define a baseline that defines how the page should be laid out. We're not processing the text, we're not checking the translation, we're checking the layout of the page. So it doesn't matter if one sentence in English would be 8 words long, and the same sentence in French or Spanish would be 12 words long. As long as the structure of the page remains the same, the test will pass.
Great. Just before I give the next question, I just want to mention I see a lot of people asking about seeing the tool in action and seeing the coding behind it. So I will be in touch after the session. I will be in touch with Eran to make sure that someone on his team gets back to you and for a demo. Okay, so because we won't be showing that right now. So so anyone that asks to see it in action, we will be in touch with you after the session. I'm seeing all the requests. Don't worry about it. So just know that I'm not ignoring. We're just taking question about what Sumeet and Eran presented here right now. The next question. I think this is for Sumeet, but I'm sure that Eran can chime in if he wants to. We are now considering implementing automation testing for our app. Where do you recommend we start?
So if you are looking to do an automation of your app, then again, I think choosing the tool from a functional testing perspective is critical. So you can do multiple different ways, right? People have done it in different ways. So there are frameworks you need to make a choice on, and making sure that it satisfies all your criteria. Like a lot of times it's budgetary constraints. So but there are a lot of open source frameworks that support. APM is one of them that we use here. And once you have that, then Applitools is just comes as a byproduct. Or I shouldn't say a byproduct, just comes as a natural segue or integration to it. So APM is the way to go.
Can I give you the next question?
Sure, please.
Okay. I think this is for Sumeet, and again, Eran can chime in. What were your biggest challenges with implementing visual testing at scale? And what is the volume of visual tests you run, and are these all run within the CI/CD pipeline?
So I'll answer the simple thing first. Yes, they are all part of CI/CD pipeline. I think your question was why visual testing is. Did you say that why visual testing is critical for us, or?
He asked about the challenges that you may have encountered during implementation of visual testing at scale.
So I think the challenge was not with the product and with the framework. Your first or the most challenging part is to make people realize and getting the budget and the whole process of being able to acquire the tool is more challenging than actually implementation. So creating that value and awareness with the senior teams to make them understand why visual testing is important and what's the effort spent on that, and how many are the number of bugs that you really find for on visuals is important. Like I was just going through with one of my test leads and said, oh, so we found like 30 issues, which are everything was fine on Chrome, but we start to test on mobile browsers and we found 30 issues. So I think getting people awareness of how large that is and so important, and it's the bigger challenge than actually implementation. And our tests run through a CI/CD pipeline. On an average, we run about 500 tests every day.
And the follow-up question, which actually we got a few similar questions. What is the time frame that took you to implement Applitools, and how many staff days, week, resources did it take it to integrate into CI?
So I think so your CI framework should already be existing, right? So it's not. But if you were to look from a pure Applitools perspective, I would say 2 weeks. So from the process of getting licensing to the tool, I would say 80 to 100 man hours, right? So that people have more clarity. It's just one person spending maybe 2 weeks to 2.5 weeks with the Applitools engineers, and we're able to get it set up and running.
Okay, and unfortunately we are out of time, but I will take this last one question, and it's about baselines. And a lot of people asked about this, so I'm going to take the one most comprehensive question that I got about that. Here goes. Baseline image seems to be critical for automated visual testing. How do I ensure that baseline image is bug-free? And what is the quality process that goes through verifying that baseline image? And after the baseline image is ready for testing, how do you determine what type of operating system, browser, resolution, etc. testing is required? And how do you add or change new resolutions or new browsers?
Eran, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think it's I'll answer one part and then you can share your experience. From our experience, the baseline, you have two options. You can set it automatically. That is, I would say, 99% of what our customers do. And the other percent goes and manually approves every single screenshot, depending on the size of their application. Because what we found was that, and again, that's feedback from customers, is that the screenshot that they're grabbing, they're confident with when they're defining the baseline, and then as they adopt more and more Applitools across their platform, because they don't start at full scale, they start with a small project, and then as they build confidence, they start to kind of automate even that baseline definition, and I would say hand it over to Applitools versus do it manually on their end. And Sumit, maybe you can say how you started with your baseline.
Like, so I think, Eran, just to echo what you said, either it's a manual process of creating a baseline and making sure that you review and you understand that that baseline is accurate. But what we were also fortunate to do, because we were going through a lot of redesigns, that we had design elements. So we took our design as the Bible or the baseline, and we ran against whatever was dev teams working against the baseline, against the design. So
yeah, we also have customers that are using mockups for mobile apps and comparing that against the real running application. So once the mockup is approved, then you run it against your code, and similar to what you just said, only in the mobile world, same thing.
right.
Okay, so actually we are out of time, unfortunately. We did get a few questions asking about if Applitools is also relevant for, is it just testing websites or also mobile apps? So yes, it is relevant for mobiles. And again, anyone that wanted a demo and asked for one or will ask now, you still have time to just to send me your information in the questions panel, and I'll make sure someone from Eran's team will get back to you about that. So you can do that now. So again, unfortunately, that's all the time that we had for today. We even ran a bit longer than planned. I want to thank everyone that joined us for this live session, and of course, thank our expert speakers, Mr. Sumeet Mandloi and Mr. Eran Barlev, for this amazing and in-depth presentation. Thank you very much. And I want to remind you that a link to the recording of this session and the slide deck will be emailed to you by Friday. And I do hope to see you all at our next event. So thank you.